Welcome, internet friends, to Subscriber Storytime number 20. It's been a hot minuto since we've done one of these, so I thought it was time to get back into it. Two things before we get started. We're coming up on another subscriber milestone, almost at 350,000, which is utterly nuts to me. Why are you here? So, again, Cameo merch, including the Wendigo Cameo designs, is currently available in the Teespring shop. You guys really loved that over the holiday season, so it's coming back for this time around, and a new Cameo design will be dropping soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I'll also be doing a Q&A sometime in June because it's been like a year, maybe longer. Also, my podcast is back. Me and my lovely boyfriend Alex have a podcast together called Thoughtcraft Cast, and we are having a blast being on a more consistent release schedule now that we're settled in. So we will be uploading new episodes. Good God, I can't talk today. Every Wednesday. And this last week, we had a little heart-to-heart about depression and living with a loved one who suffers from it. So if that sounds appealing, or like it might offer some helpful advice, or if you have or if you just have an hour to kill. That's how I deal with bloopers. I just fucking talk right through them. Or if you have an hour to kill, or you just need to clean your room or do some laundry, flip that on and check it out. And thank you in advance for checking it out if you decide to do that. Good Lord, words escape me today. Okay, now let's get into the stories. We have 6 of them today, and I recommend you grab yourself a snack or a drink, sit back, turn down the lights, and enjoy. Or maybe you could clean your room while you listen, you filthy animal. Just kidding. Okay, here we go. This happened at 1 a.m. when I was in the kitchen brushing my teeth, which might sound weird to some people. I have 3 siblings, and back then, we all got ready for bed at the same time. All the bathrooms were occupied, so I thought I'd use the kitchen sink instead, and to this day, I still use that spot to brush my teeth every night. While sitting at the dining table brushing my teeth and casually browsing the internet, the feeling of being watched fell over me, and chills crept up my spine. I glanced around, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness beyond the kitchen. A dim orange light in the hall was the only source of brightness, and I mentally scolded myself for being too lazy to turn on more. Then I spotted my little sister staring intensely at me, crouched at the bottom of the stairs. The entrance to the kitchen and the staircase are directly opposite each other, separated by a hall. In the low light, I could still make out the carpet pattern on the stairs, but strangely, I only saw my sister's silhouette. Confused, I stared at her for a while before rolling my eyes and returning my attention back to my phone. She ran upstairs, but I didn't hear her going into her bedroom. Strange, since every door in my house makes noise when closing or opening. Maybe she was up to go to the bathroom and thought she would prank me. Whatever it was, I didn't give it much thought. A few minutes later, I went to her room and saw that she was asleep. This slightly creeped me out. I heard no doors open or close between walking in and seeing her at the bottom of the stairs, so how did she get into her bedroom? Being discreet in my house was impossible, confirmed by the times I tried to sneak into the kitchen at midnight and failed because of the loudness of each door. I woke her, but it seemed like she'd been out for a while, as she was annoyed and grumbling. I bolted for my room immediately after. The next morning, I told her about the incident. Being the honest, intellectual 11-year-old with a ridiculous fear of ghosts that she was, she immediately denied being up and was as weirded out as I was. At 1 a.m. the following evening, I was brushing my teeth in the kitchen again, still with only one light on despite the last night's experience. And the same thing happened again. This time, however, when I spotted her crouching there, I, with toothbrush and foamy mouth, immediately rushed towards the spiral staircase to see her dash up to the next floor. I chased after her, turning a light switch on each floor I passed, but still, I could only catch her shadow at the corner of my eyes. On the turn of the 3rd floor, she vanished. I looked in my room, the storage rooms, and even the balconies on the 5th floor, but I saw nothing. Coming back down, I checked my sister's bedroom one last time. She was there, sound asleep. I heard no door being opened or closed the whole time. I told my family the next day, and they all laughed it off, which I expected. It doesn't happen anymore, though I'm always turning on all the lights now. During my 16-year stay at this house, I'd never had or heard about any paranormal experiences until that one night. Whatever that thing was, I'm still grateful nobody in my family got hurt. My name is Ashley, and as I write this very personal experience today, I am in my 30s. However, this happened when I was 16, and it will forever haunt me. I grew up in Kid Paradise. We lived in a large ranch-style home on over 4 acres, containing everything from swamps to woodlands and a large pond called Shepherd's Pond. My mom, my sister, and myself lived in a historical town just south of Boston. I was a well-mannered child up until I turned 15, when I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, smoking cigarettes we'd swiped from our parents, and sneaking out late at night to hang out, usually around a bonfire. My mom clearly wanted the best for my sister and I, but she was very strict, and we constantly argued about my behavior. She was tired of me sneaking out and eventually started locking the doors, leaving me stuck outside all night long. Around this time, she also started dating a man who embodied the mean stepdad. He was abusive and nasty, and I spent as much time as possible away from home just to avoid him. Disliking my mom's boyfriend put even more stress on our already strained relationship. I wanted my mom to dump this jerk and go back to the mom she used to be so we could have that relationship again. But my wish never came true. I eventually moved out at 17 and lived on the streets, but I digress. This particular night, I decided I wanted to be warm and to try to get to school in the morning for once. So I stayed in my room all night, not even coming out for dinner. About 10 p.m., I slowly opened the door and looked out. My bedroom was at the very end of the hallway, and I could see the bathroom door, as well as my mother's and sister's doors. Beyond that was the front door and the living room. There was only one dim light in the center of the hall. The fixture itself was like the rest of the home, old, from the late 1800s, and was never updated. The darkness made me hesitate, but I really needed to use the bathroom. I did my business and went to open the door, but as soon as my hand touched the knob, I heard a faint sound. I froze, thinking flushing the toilet woke my evil stepdad, and I was about to get yelled at. But nothing else happened. A moment passed, and I opened the door slowly, peering into an empty hallway. The house was so quiet and still, and kind of creepy. From the doorway, I looked into my sister's room and saw her fast asleep in bed. I tiptoed to my room and turned to close the door, but then the sounds started again. A clear rustling and shuffling on the floor, as if someone was walking around near the living room. Briefly, I considered running down the hallway, but something stopped me. Instead, I just stood still. The shuffling suddenly stopped, like it noticed me standing there. Squinting into the hall, I saw nothing. Then an abrupt, grunting chuckle of an older man echoed up the hallway. I gasped and shut the door. Knowing that my mother was asleep with her beloved boyfriend at this hour, and my sister was also sleeping, I became scared, thinking there was an intruder. I waited for a few minutes, and the footsteps began. They were not quiet, pitter-pattering footsteps, or even regular ones. It was the sound of heavy boots stomping around, the footfalls making their way slowly up the hallway. At this point, I dropped to the floor, looking under the crack at the bottom of the door, and started crying, terrified. The rank smell of tobacco and fresh earth filled my nostrils as the steps got closer. My panic worsened as the sound stopped in front of my doorway. A loud cry escaped me as I saw two very large, mud-covered black boots stop and turn towards my door. The mud rolled off of the boots onto the floor, and there were even small particles of plants within it. The person, or whatever this thing was, let out a loud, grunting laugh, as if it was enjoying itself. My doorknob began violently turning back and forth, but it did not open. I cried harder, ready for whatever it was to swing my door open, at which point there would be nowhere to run or to hide. Then my mom's voice rang out from down the hall. "Ashley? What the hell?" Everything went quiet for a moment. Then the boots started stomping so violently it shook the walls, the small reading lamp on the desk shaking with each footfall, and I felt the vibrations in the floorboards. "What the hell, Ashley? Go to bed!" my mom yelled. I could hear her talking with her boyfriend, and his response saying I was probably sneaking out and that she should do something about it. Then I heard the creak of my mom's bed as she got up and went to her door. The footsteps continued, stomping, followed by a couple more laughing grunts, before my mom flung the door open, saying, "What the fuck?" And abruptly, the words dying on her tongue. I peered under my door through the crack. She stood silently in her doorway. I desperately wanted to tell her to shut her door and call the police or hide, but fear kept my jaw locked. The footsteps stopped the moment she opened the door. Silence. Then, the sound of running down the hallway towards my mother. Just before it got to her doorway, she slammed the door. I heard her run to her bed, get in, and tell her boyfriend that it was nothing and to go to sleep. The next morning, after I got ready for school, with my mom still asleep, I looked for any evidence of the muddy footprints and found nothing. When I got home, I asked her to talk to me, and she admitted she'd heard the sounds as well. When I asked her what she saw, she told me she didn't want to talk about it. Years later, she admitted there was nothing there, and it scared her. Scared her so deeply, she never checked on any sounds again. We now have a good relationship. She divorced her husband after he cheated on her and stole a sizable amount of money from her estate, including my college funds. But we will always have this unresolved thing between us with this event. Always. My grandmother always told me I was a dreamer ever since I was little, although it's not the kind of dreamer you'd expect. Being a teenager, I have dreams and aspirations, but my dreams are a little more complicated. I'm a premonition dreamer. Google defines a premonition as a forewarning of something that is going to happen before it does, without having any concrete evidence to support it. I am sure there are many others out there who also have these dreams, but I have an unusual amount of them. About a year ago, I started experiencing premonitions about unlocked doors in places I was currently in or lived in. It doesn't sound too creepy or scary, but these dreams bothered me. I guess I'll start when these specific dreams began and work my way up to the present. It all started when one of my best friends, Jane, gave me a Ouija board for my 16th birthday. She knew I loved horror and the paranormal and supernatural and creepy stuff, so I enjoyed her thoughtful gift. However, I knew I was never going to even open it, as I am religious and my grandmother warned me to never play around with the spiritual world. But I didn't want to throw it away, so I kept it in my closet, unopened and untouched. This was either a blessing or a curse, because that's when my dreams started occurring. Every night, this horrid, morbid dream invaded my sleep with the most awful things. I often awoke with tears in my eyes or drenched in sweat. This went on for a while, and finally, the first dream about the unlocked door occurred. My family, my sister's friend, and I vacation in a condo in Palm Springs every summer for about a week. Since there isn't enough beds, I always volunteer to sleep on the couch. One night, I fell asleep to a movie and dreamt about my family in the same condo, except they were dead. In the dream, I cautiously walk around the condo, my phone's flashlight illuminating them, bloody and mutilated in their beds. I started to cry and heard a creak from the front area. I peered out of the room and saw a hooded figure standing at the door, holding a bloody butcher knife, staring directly at me. I froze in horror as he lifted the knife, pointing it right at me. He groaned and in a distorted voice said,
"The front door, the front door, the front door, the front door."
I jolted awake and frantically ran towards the front door to see if it was locked. It wasn't. Relieved after I turned the lock, I climbed back onto the couch and fell asleep right away since it was only 5 a.m. When I woke again later, I told my older sister about it. She said her friend left the condo to go on a walk around 4:30 a.m. because he couldn't sleep, leaving the door unlocked. About a month after my vacation, my sister discovered the unopened Ouija board in my closet. When I explained it was a gift from Jane, she started to freak out, saying it was creepy and that she didn't want our house to be haunted. Then she grabbed it, went to the backyard, and threw it away. I wasn't too unhappy that it was gone. I was never going to use it anyway. Then my second premonition happened. After skiing with Jane in early December, I went to bed pretty late one Wednesday night. My dream started out in my dad's house on the front staircase, overlooking the living room. Walking down the steps, I noticed my cat on the floor, not moving. Upon stepping closer, I noticed a puddle of blood underneath her. She was dead. I took one step past her and the setting immediately changed to my older sister's room. Messy as usual, I glanced around and felt a breeze coming from the window, blinds swaying in the wind. Reluctantly, I walked over to the window and pulled the blinds away from the glass. I screamed when I saw the same hooded figure, dark and distorted, with pure white eyes piercing my soul, holding the same bloody knife in the previous dream, pointing it at me again. In the same distorted voice, he quietly said,
"The window, my dear, the window is broken. The window is broken, my dear, the window."
I woke up this time very calmly, and I thought nothing of it and went back to bed. When I arrived at my mom's after the trip, she sat me down and told me, "Honey, your dad's house was broken into. No one was home, but some of your stepmom's things were stolen." I asked, "Did he go through the window?" This seemed to freak her out because the intruder had shattered the glass and came through the window. I should have taken those dreams more seriously because the next dream almost became my reality. My best friend Amber invited me over to her house after she was dealing with a major breakup with her girlfriend. Amber also invited our other good friend over, and we had a great time together, baking, drawing, watching Netflix, basically doing everything Amber enjoys to get her mind off of the breakup. All three of us shared Amber's bed for the night in her room, which had a windowed door overlooking the backyard. She let her two big dogs out one last time to take a leak before hopping into bed and flipping the lights off. We all eventually fell asleep. In my dream, I was laying on my stomach, in bed next to Amber as she was snoring away. As I fell asleep, I felt an ice-cold, rough, calloused hand press against the back of my neck. I completely froze, paralyzed in fear, and heard heavy breathing behind my ear. My stomach felt warm and sticky with nausea when I heard a faint whisper.
I'm right here.
I jolted awake and immediately knew the back door was unlocked, just 4 feet away from me. I bolted towards it, gripped the knob with all of my strength, and turned the lock, not even bothering to look through the window. I felt the knob turn a little, back and forth slowly. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, I lifted my head and peered through the window. In front of me was a Caucasian man with cold blue eyes, tall and lean, with a black hoodie, inches away from me, tapping on the glass with his knife. I just stood there and stared as we both gripped the door handle. He grinned, and I had had enough. My heart pounding, hands sweating, I felt faint. In my mind, I kept repeating to myself, "He's real, holy shit, he's real. Don't just stand there, do something." But I could only stand there, analyzing this man, a potential murderer. In my peripheral vision, I saw the living room lights turn on, and so did he. He waved at me, let go of the handle, and took off towards the back gate. Amber's dad marched in, hockey stick in hand, asking if I was all right. I told him I locked the door, and he hugged me, relieved as we heard sirens approaching the house. By now, everyone else was awake. What if I hadn't locked the door in time? What if I'd fallen back asleep? And they never caught the suspect, and a year later, I always take unlocked door dreams seriously due to that one night. It changed my life. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who experiences these kinds of dreams, but I know that if Jane never gave me that Ouija board for my 16th birthday, I might be the one talking through it from the other side. I'm originally from a small town in an Eastern European country I will not be naming. I only moved once while living there during my childhood. When I was 12, my parents bought an apartment in a fairly old complex. So old, it was built when the town itself was founded, back in the 1950s, close to an iron factory. It was supposed to accommodate the workers and their families. Imagine your average Russian town when the Soviet Union was blossoming, and you'll get the general idea. The elderly couple we bought the unit from were its first and only owners over the last 50 years. Even at a young age, I found this both fascinating and, to be completely honest, a bit scary. Anyone over 50 seemed ancient at that age. I didn't know much about the couple. Frankly, I wasn't that interested. They moved out quickly and relocated to the capital city to be closer to their grandchildren. Living there for so long left its imprint on the apartment, and my family spent months renovating. We changed almost everything, from pipes to wires, floor, and wallpaper. The first few years, nothing unusual happened. It was a lovely building in a really nice and quiet area, with mostly elderly neighbors. I can't pinpoint exactly when the odd occurrences began, mostly because I brushed them off in the beginning. The first thing we noticed was a strange smell emanating through the walls of my bedroom. The smell was rot, and strangely, the stench came and went in a completely inconsistent manner. At first, my mom accused me of leaving food in my room or not emptying my lunchbox, but after a thorough investigation, we found nothing. In the end, my parents blamed the smell on the small graphic design business run out of the basement of the building. The man working there used all sorts of paints and chemicals. As the smell wasn't always there, it didn't bother us too much. The next thing seemed just as innocent as the first. Anyone who lives or has ever lived in an apartment complex knows it's never completely silent. You can always hear the footfall or the voices of your neighbors. The walls in our building were thick, but we still heard everyday noises from time to time, which is probably why I wasn't really concerned when the footsteps first started. Being an only child with working parents, I was often alone in the apartment. This is when it usually happened, when I was completely focused on something unrelated. While doing my homework or chatting with my friends on the computer, the sudden creaking sound of the wooden floor coming from the direction of the living room made me jump. However, it was easy to mistake the noises from above with the rooms beside you, so it didn't bother me much. Not until the footsteps became louder and came closer. A number of times, I even felt a firm tapping on my shoulder, so realistic I instinctively turned around, only to find nothing and nobody behind me. A moment later, my brain caught up, and I remembered I was home alone. Most people would feel fear or a sense of unease at this, but in all honesty, I didn't feel particularly scared or spooked. I was mostly confused and thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. It was strange to me, however, that it always happened when I was zoned out, completely engaged in something else, not paying attention to my surroundings. The explanation of supernatural occurrence didn't cross my mind. I have always believed in such stories, and still do to this day, but I always imagine flying objects, ghostly apparitions, and Ouija boards, something more concrete and horrifying. Certainly not phantom taps on one's shoulders. But when I was in high school, these occurrences turned somewhat serious. I clearly remember 2 separate times when I actually felt scared of the unknown. I don't exactly remember which one was first or how close they were to each other in time. When I was about 16, the apartment above was sold to a new owner who renovated from the top to bottom and didn't move in until about 6 months later. She was a single doctor in her late 30s and only came to see how the work was going on the weekends. A group of 4 men worked on the apartment every day. I remember this because one of the workers was a young guy, not much older than me, and I had a minor crush on him at the time. We would say hi to each other or have small talk when we crossed paths. I never asked, however, anything about his job or the apartment. He usually arrived in the morning when I was leaving for school and left around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. The apartment was empty after that, but I began waking up on a regular basis in the middle of the night. Loud bangs, like furniture being moved or something heavy repeatedly dropped onto the floor, roused me from sleep. It was definitely coming from the upstairs apartment, the room above mine. It took my brain a minute or two to remember the apartment was empty, and for the first time, I actually grew fearful. After this happened a few times, I told my mother. She said it was just the building settling, or that it was coming from the apartment adjacent to ours, which was occupied. I got used to it after a time. It didn't wake me anymore, and since nothing else happened, I forgot about it. I can't recall if the final and most terrifying occurrence happened while the apartment was still empty or after the new neighbor moved in. It was winter, around 6 p.m., and as usual, I was alone. Since it was already dark outside, I snuggled up in bed watching a TV show. My relaxation was interrupted by a harsh knock on the door, which I assumed was my mom at first. It was odd that I didn't hear her enter the building, though. We had an intercom system, and the phone always beeped when someone came in using our apartment's code. I thought she might have come in with a neighbor or used her keys. As I approached the door, however, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. Out of some strange instinct, I didn't turn on the lights, just slowly walked up to the door and looked through the peephole to see who was on the other side. It wasn't my mother. The hall outside was pitch black, and I couldn't see a figure or a silhouette. I slowly backed away, silent for a moment until whoever was outside knocked again, loudly 3 times. I was annoyed, but nowhere near brave enough to open the door. I asked as confidently as I could, "Who's there?" No answer. Another minute passed without event, and I went back to my bedroom. A little shaken and confused, I considered calling my mom, but changed my mind. It would sound ridiculous, me being spooked out by knocking on the door. I tried to focus on the TV once again, checking the time every few minutes, waiting for my mom to come home. A few minutes passed when the silence was broken again, this time by the doorbell. A strange, unexplainable anger rolled over me. Thinking someone must be playing a prank on me, I jumped out of bed and practically ran to the front door, unlocking it and opening it up with one swift movement. To this day, I wonder where the courage came from and if it was stupid of me. Just like before, I could only see the darkness. The lights were off and it was completely silent. No shadows or sounds from any dark corners. From my bedroom to the front door couldn't have taken me more than 30 seconds to reach, maybe even less. There was no time to escape the scene without making noise or being caught. Though we were on the ground floor, beside the main entrance, the heavy door there made it impossible to exit without being heard. My heart was beating fast. The rhythm drummed in my ears and my bravery withered away when I smelled the air. Smoke, but not the scent of a cigarette. Heavy and dusty with an oily gas-like scent to it, almost mechanical. Suddenly realizing what I was doing, I jumped back in the apartment, turning all 3 locks and breathing heavily. Minutes passed and I couldn't move. My brain worked hard to make sense of what had just happened. It wasn't over, though. Still standing in front of the front door, petrified, I heard a bang, loud and heavy, similar to the ones from the apartment above. One single bang from the first floor was followed by a series of smaller ones, like someone tripped over and was falling down the stairs or something was thrown down. That was my breaking point. I ran back to my room, shut my door, and got into bed on the verge of tears. Who was out there? Why would any of my elderly neighbors make noises in complete darkness, knock on doors, and ring doorbells? I stayed in bed until my mom came home, not long after. The intercom went off, and I came out of my bedroom, waiting for her to enter, desperately hoping that she would have an explanation. Maybe a homeless person managed to get in, or one of the neighbors came home drunk. Deep down, I knew both scenarios were highly unlikely. Unfortunately, the expression on my mom's face confirmed my fear. She didn't seem upset or confused. In fact, she smiled at me and said hi while taking off her coat. Too shaken to just let it go, before I could stop myself, I asked in a hollow voice, "What happened out there?" "Where?" she asked, looking at me, puzzled. "Out in the hall," I said. "I heard banging and it sounded like someone falling down the stairs." She looked worried for a second, and then she shook her head. "Nothing is out there. Maybe a neighbor just dropped some groceries." I didn't want to push the topic any further, though her explanation didn't make much sense. If a neighbor was dropping stuff, you would expect maybe voices, cursing, the jingle of keys, the sound of another front door being opened. Lacking any evidence, though, I just tried to forget about it. It came up in conversations later, though, and every time my family made fun of me for being paranoid, blaming it on my obsession with spooky things. Nothing major happened after this. Although the sound of footsteps never stopped, the rotten smell still appeared from time to time. I convinced myself something was still wrong with the building. For college, I spent the majority of my time in a different city, and shortly after graduating, I moved to Ireland. Since leaving the country, I spend very little time at home, no more than a few weeks every year, and I'm rarely alone in the apartment anymore. There are some things, however, that confirm my theory that the building is haunted to some degree. Since moving out, my parents got a cat. The typical sophisticated yet lazy feline who has no interest in running or playing. Usually we find her in a comfy spot, sleeping for hours on end. My room, however, deeply annoyed and upset her. My mom told me, even I witnessed it on one occasion, that after spending time in there, the cat would bolt out of the room as if running for her life, the hairs standing on her back. After, she wouldn't go near my room for days. She would, however, sometimes stop at the doorstep and just stare at seemingly nothing. Regarding the apartment above us, the woman who bought it years ago eventually moved in, and a couple of years back, she adopted a baby. We don't have the best relationship with her for various reasons, but she works in the local hospital. My town is small and rather gossipy, so we know certain things about her. My mom would always refer to her adopted baby as the demon child. I understand why, though. From the moment he arrived, we began hearing the worst and most painful cries from him, high-pitched and almost unnatural. It sounded excruciating and was extremely loud for a baby. It bothered us to the point that one time, my mom went up to ask if everything was all right and if she could help. The doctor apparently has hated us since, being offended by the assumption that she couldn't handle her own baby. The child is now about 5 years old, and he still freaks me out every time I happen to pass him. He's unnaturally serious, but could throw the worst tantrums. The other young families with little children who moved in the past few years tried to keep their distance, telling their kids not to play with him since he is so rough and violent. He would encourage the other children to hurt one another, their minder or their parents, and he taught them vulgar, disgusting words and expressions. The worst part still are the noises and the banging. For a child so small, the noise he makes in his room, the room above mine, is incredible. It's like furniture being moved and something heavy repeatedly dropping onto the floor. It sounds just like years ago when the apartment was still empty, before he was even born. At this point, I can't draw any clear conclusions. There is probably a completely reasonable explanation for everything, but it still disturbs me. Warning from yours truly on this one, a bit of suicidal imagery in this next story. Nothing graphic, but if you would like to skip it, you can go to the timestamp listed below. There is only one dream that won't stop bothering me, no matter how much time I put between who I was then when I had it and who I am now. I am a supernatural enthusiast and someone who pushes encounter for meaning, for explanation, for significance. I've had a number of experiences I attribute to the supernatural. These experiences are uncanny, unconventional, but they have answers. My great-grandparents' house, the objects that moved themselves, the chills that would run down my spine in the heat of a Massachusetts summer. My Gigi and G-Dad saying hello from beyond the grave, or maybe fucking with us because they died old and bitter, if largely content, as I figured. My childhood home. A hand once gently shook me awake late on a Saturday morning, but no one was there. Friends saw a strange figure in black cross my backyard. All of my siblings, myself, our babysitter, and her friend heard footsteps stomp above and below us for hours one night. We searched the house as a pack countless times. Everything was locked, and we were the only ones there. Who or what haunts our house, I don't know, but ghosts are a satisfying enough explanation. The dreams I have of small moments before they happen, the most innocuous of moments, thoughts in my head as I speak to someone or see something specific. This phenomenon peaked in my middle school years. They still happen now, though, even in college. I used to strive for meaning of these little predictions, frustrated at their inability to signify. After years, I realized they weren't a threat. The government wasn't coming to get me because I was psychic. They just happened, and that has been answer enough for me. My brain doesn't handle serotonin correctly on its own, and it sometimes feels out specific moments, months, or years before they happened. Both just facts established and known. In my high school years, two things became unavoidable: my anxiety disorder and my sexuality. Despite my social anxiety, I had a decent amount of friends and a few best friends. One was, to my teenage self, the most amazing person I had ever met, Charlotte. I realized retrospectively I was in love with Charlotte from our freshman year until shortly after graduation. It's hard to draw lines of definite time around the first great love of your life. I was a lesbian so deep in the closet I never questioned the presumption that I was straight. I was closeted even to myself, and I was unaware of my anxiety disorder and that it was becoming worse. My friendship with Charlotte was intense, lots of ups and downs. I made it so because all these feelings boiled just far enough below the surface that I couldn't grasp them. I was convinced I wasn't worthy of her, that our friendship was doomed, even though it was the deepest and most intense I'd ever felt for another person. My brain was a live wire all through sophomore year. We'd fight, say the friendship was over, and apologize, repeat. Specifics are unpleasant to recall, to say the least. What's important is the potency and complication of the tangle of emotions I was experiencing. I don't remember the exact date of the first time I had the nightmare. All I can recall is it was right before or right after I finally got myself to a therapist. I also don't remember how many times I had the nightmare or specific instances of it. All I remember is what it was and the feeling it had always left me with. Still leaves me with when I think too hard about it. I'd had nightmares where I felt totally powerless, but these nightmares are things like falling or shadowy figures creeping along the edges of a room, common things that are almost universal and harmless. Even the more outlandish, odder ones are just nightmares, a stress or fear I can place. I'm in a room. My back to a door I know is locked. I know because I've tried it, and the handle won't let me out. I enter the dream knowing this, the same way that I know this room has no windows, no openings anywhere. I've checked. The walls are plain gray, concrete. There is a dingy light without a visible source. In front of me is a woman, and I am terrified of her. Her dress is the most stomach-curdling, unbearable yellow. I hate yellow in both the waking realm and in dreaming. Layers of skirts patterned in elaborate mustard flowers rustle at me, revolting. The woman is crying. Tears stream down her frantic face as she stumbles closer to me, almost screaming through her sobs. Her hair is brown, the same shade as Charlotte's, a little lighter than mine, but perhaps that's the memory polishing itself. It hangs in looped curls that swing as she moves jerkily. She's holding a gun in her mouth, an old-fashioned revolver. I know she's going to pull the trigger any second now. She's going to kill herself right in front of me. There is nothing I can do. I enter the dream already knowing I have tried everything I can to keep her from shooting herself, and now it's too late. All I can do is wait for her to die in front of me. Nothing more to try, no answer to be had. Sometime that spring, I read Charlotte Perkins Gilman's short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. So did Charlotte, my Charlotte. We were in the same class. A mad woman, repulsive yellow flowers. Maybe where the dress came from? That is all I have ever been able to analyze about this dream. I told people, tried to make sense of the story by relating it to others. I'd shared Google searches of the meaning of various elements of the dream. I tried to make light of it, saying it was the dress that bothered me most. I really hated yellow. It wasn't the dress. I had a reputation of being eccentric, but this nightmare was a little too hardcore for most people. I realized I was failing to make meaning of this scene that kept trapping me when I slept, that tortured me after Charlotte stopped talking to me, for a number of months anyway. I told my therapist. Anne was cool, was good at figuring out why my brain was doing what it was. I'd only been seeing her for a few weeks, but I already trusted her with almost everything. I told her every detail and practically begged her to figure out what my brain was trying to tell me, why it would conjure up something this terrifying. She didn't know. She wasn't concerned about me having anything other than anxiety, but she didn't know. She told me it was a stress dream and that it would go away as we worked through everything going on with me in our twice-monthly sessions. Anne was right on that bit. Therapy has been the great miracle of my life. I stopped having the dreams sometime into the summer after sophomore year. Charlotte and I became friends again for a bit, and then I pined after her for the rest of high school after she broke it off again. Now I'm an out lesbian, over Charlotte, and content with my life and who I am. But I have never been able to figure out who that woman in the horrible yellow dress is, or where in my psyche she came from. It's been around 4 days since this occurred, and none of us really know what happened that day. Mary, Kyle, Wes, and myself, known as Dave to my friends, planned for weeks to go camping, and we'd taken 3 days off of our collective jobs just for this trip. So, needless to say, we were pretty damn excited. During the first day, not much happened. We hiked up to our spot, saw a few deer, and drank some really warm soda, which is as unpleasant as it sounds. More towards the end of the day, things got a bit weird. We were setting up the campfire at sundown when Mary suddenly said, "Hey, guys, are your phones dead?" We all pulled out our phones, and to our surprise, they were all dead, even though we had barely used them. I had a few portable chargers packed, so I pulled one out, expecting to charge up my phone to have it ready in case of an emergency. However, after finding my 2 portable chargers also dead, I felt something was definitely wrong. I ensured everything was charged before I left, and yet they'd all stopped functioning. We lit the fire, deciding it wasn't anything to worry about, that we'd probably be fine. We ate, messed around, and went to sleep. Later in the evening, I woke up in my tent. A bit annoyed by my interrupted sleep, I rolled over and shut my eyes when I heard something odd, the cracking of a branch outside. I sat up a bit, listening, but thought one of the others was just taking a piss. After lying awake for a bit, I fell back asleep. I woke the next morning to the sound of Wes screaming. Groggily, I tumbled out of my tent, asking what was wrong, and then I saw it. Wes's tent was shredded on one side, and when I say shredded, I mean it was like Wolverine came along and ripped it apart. We all stood there, confused and more than a little unnerved. Kyle tried to rationalize it, saying, maybe a bear did it or something. We all knew this was a flimsy idea, but we didn't like the alternatives, so we played along. After eating breakfast, we decided to move down the mountain and plan out our next camping trip. But by the time the sun began to set, we were all on the edge of losing our collective minds. We walked for hours, tired and more than a little scared. It took less than half a day to get up there, so why the hell was it taking so long to get back? Mary and Kyle agreed that our best option was to set up camp and wait until the morning to keep going. Wes slept in my tent since his was destroyed, and we all slept after a quiet meal. That night, a loud crash woke us all up. When I got out of the tent, I noticed Kyle and Mary both lying on the ground, unconscious. I kicked Wes in the foot and told him to grab the med kit from his bag before running over to see what was wrong. But while running, everything suddenly felt weird and slow. It was like being in the bottom of a swimming pool trying to sprint. Another loud crash happened and the sky lit up as if we were in the midst of a lightning storm. I blinked and suddenly we were on the road leading to the mountain we'd been camping on. We were all fully clothed and packed. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. We looked at each other, and as I opened my mouth to say something, Kyle interrupted with, "Don't." We walked back to the cars in silence and drove home. We can't explain what happened, and I'm more than a little confused. None of our phones seemed to want to turn on, and Wes never found his shredded tent. The whole situation was just weird. Special thanks to the Patreon family, who are now more vital to this channel's survival than I can say, due to the recent demonetization of almost every new Dark Matters or Nameless that has come out. The names you see on screen are just some of the lovely people who financially contribute to this channel. Whether they are passionate about subscriber story times and true crime cases, or any other dark content on this channel, their support cannot be overstated. If you are interested in supporting the channel, information is in the description, but even if you only continue to support by watching, thank you. And of course, a special thanks to the subscribers who chose to share their stories with us today. That would be Emery, Ashley, Eden, Victoria, Eliza, and Shibe Kun. If you have had a personal terrifying encounter you've had, it can be paranormal or not, please feel free to send it to subscriberstorytime@gmail.com, and your experience might end up in the next subscriber storytime. Woo! I can tell when people haven't listened all the way to the end of this because they'll ask me, I have a story that I want to appear in subscriber storytime. Where do I send it? And I'm like, that person didn't watch to the end of the video. Yeah. If you wish to stay anonymous for your story, by the way, please mention that in your email. Thank you for watching the video. And most of all, thank you for continuing to support the channel. And don't forget to pick up your Wendigo shirts or cameo shirts, whichever. Yeah, and check out the podcast. Stay safe, friends, and have a good night.